Developers are currently making tons of live service games that will inevitably fail because they're, well, bad at math. Is the next Battlefield one of those games? Now, this video is inspired by the words of Mark Darrah, a video game industry veteran who's worked at BioWare for over 20 years, led multiple major game teams, and even served as a VP at Electronic Arts. Mark Darrah has a YouTube channel where he drops videos that dive into the fundamental questions that any game developer should be asking themselves before they make a video game, and I find his content fascinating because there's really not that many people in the world with Mark's experience that are also willing to talk about it so openly and regularly on a YouTube channel. It's kind of awesome, and if you think that sounds like content you'd be into, go check out his channel and give him a sub. So he has a recent video on his channel titled Live Service Trap Napkin Math for the Win. And in this video he talks about how there seems to be a 10-year cycle where developers fall into the same trap of trying to calculate their game's success based on crappy napkin math. And what he means is it's basically fast math that you might calculate on the spot to determine the potential success of a game that you're working on based on nowhere near enough figures nor the correct type of math needed. He gives the example of people trying to follow in the footsteps of one of the first MMO games, Ultima Online, and saying that if we can get just 10% of that player base to play our game, then we'll have $300,000 a month of income to support our game. Of course, the problem with that type of math is that it fails to take into account the exponential curve of game success with games in the same genre. If you make, say, a Call of Duty clone on the premise that you can potentially get 10% of the audience of Call of Duty, well, the reality is that you're going to get far less, even if it's an extremely competent competitor. So while developers might sink millions into producing a game on some really simplistic math, the reality is that most of the time they'll never make it back because they're not going to get that 10%. They might not even get 2% of the player base of the popular game that they're trying to compete with. The crazy success of Ultima Online and EverQuest kicked off an MMO race with the same type of napkin math, with apparently many major projects never even making it to market after they realized that they were likely going to fail even before getting their projects out the door. And the same trend is occurring now with live service games. The biggest and most successful live service games are influencing other developers to follow in their footsteps because, well, you look at a game like Destiny or COD with a fairly simple blueprint to follow and you think, well, why not follow that? Even if we get a small percentage of that success, will still be massively successful. And what Mark points out in his videos that a lot of developers aren't factoring in things like that gamers have a finite amount of time and that the biggest games in each genre tend to actually dominate those genres with like only 2 to 3 other games that can even exist as runner-ups. So there isn't much room for anyone else to get a piece of the pie if you build your game around a similar genre. And everything that Mark says in his video completely adds up. As a content creator, I'm constantly looking at the latest titles coming out, and the vast majority of new games I look at fail in the long run. And a lot of these games are actually fantastic, and I think it leads to a lot of false analysis about why the games fail. We look at weird, nuanced features and say, oh, if this game just could have had that one feature or a little bit more content, it probably would have done well. And I think that's just some flawed logic, and we can sort of look at some really fantastic games that failed nonetheless. Apex Mobile was getting 10 out of 10 reviews. Players and critics loved the game, but nonetheless it just wasn't achieving the numbers that it needed to maintain the support. The genre already had its top dogs, and even a game based on a massive IP that was expertly designed and loved by both players and critics just couldn't break into the already established genre. Titanfall 2, another game loved by players and critics. It came with both a single player, it had a multiplayer component to it that was going to be hopefully an awesome live service title, trying to carve out a niche among the giants of the industry like Call of Duty and Battlefield. It was a fantastically crafted game, innovative, interesting, fun, but it was still a shooter at the end of the day, and shooter fans are playing Call of Duty and Battlefield. There just wasn't enough willing to come over to the Titanfall franchise. Now, the question I have is, can Battlefield progress forward as a live service game? Since the franchise has switched over to the live service model, it's been delivering less content than the past games in the franchise. And basically, what we're seeing right now is the live service model is giving the publishers an easy out of delivering a lot of content. Because the content is free, people aren't dropping $15 on a DLC, so they don't have to deliver 4 maps and a ton of guns. And without a doubt, the smaller player base and probably the less effective microtransaction system just isn't generating anywhere near enough money to produce lots of DLC content. And even for me, I've got hundreds of hours in a Battlefield 2042, and I don't think I've even yet bought anything through the microtransaction system. And granted, part of that's a bit of a catch-22 with the current title, and that I don't want to invest money into a game that always seems like it's about to be canceled, and EA seems afraid to commit to more content since the finances of the game seem to be in limbo all the time, so we're sort of in this cycle. I don't want to buy any of the microtransaction stuff because I think it's going to fail, and they don't want to make any more content because they think I'm not going to buy the microtransaction stuff. I did buy more skin and cosmetic content in their previous games because I, for the most part, saw the player base lasting a lot longer and the game's getting a lot more support in the long run, but that just doesn't seem to be the case with 2042, and thus the developers are scaling back their content. And I have no doubt in my mind if 2042's active player base was significantly higher, then EA would probably be supporting the game with much more money and it'd be getting more content. But unfortunately for EA, they're in kind of a weird situation where they have lots of titles in their past like Battlefield 5, Battlefield 1, and Battlefield 4 that still have large active audiences. Some of those games actually have bigger audiences than Battlefield 2042, and those are effective pulling players away from their newest live service game and essentially not injecting more money into their system. They're almost being punished by having developed so many good games in the recent years that people are still playing because they're probably not injecting a lot of money into those older games because the microtransaction systems weren't really that well established. They weren't that well monetized for live service games compared to, say, what like Call of Duty and other titles are doing. And they're still sort of running on this model of, well, we'll just pump out a new game next year and enough people will buy that game and that'll be how the cycle continues. But when the new game isn't better than the old games and not enough players are willing to adopt it, now you run into the live service problem. And without a doubt, EA is well aware of their predicament, and I think that's the reason for the multi-pronged approach for future content. It sounds like EA is going to try several different models and maybe even see what sticks and just sort of move forward from there. Like a totally free Royale style game, a paid for main multiplayer backed with microtransaction systems kind of like the current game, and then possibly a paid for standalone single player experience or single player missions that maybe also integrate into the main system where cosmetics from single player and guns maybe will carry over if you achieve certain mission success or something like that. But of course, the most important factor and the thing that has really been the Achilles heel of DICE over the past several launches is just the launch quality of their games. They've been rushed, they've been forced out into holiday seasons when they clearly weren't ready or just had bad overall design ideas and directions from the start. And if we factor Battlefield into Mark's analysis of the industry, Battlefield really kind of is the classic FPS runner-up to Call of Duty. And I think there's definitely a large market there if EA delivers on the Battlefield formula, which again, they've been struggling with their past releases. What do you guys think? Does EA have to deliver a better, finely tuned, multi-pronged approach to their next game, or does it just have to deliver a competent Battlefield core experience for their players? Let me know in the comments, and next up, check out this video that talks about the best headphones and gear that you can get to maximize your sound in-game and get an actual tactical advantage. As always, guys, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. This is Level Cap, signing off.